Hi, Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy, and today I'm going to be showing you this. This is a Lumix 7-14 f4 zoom lens. Join me. Hi, Brian James here, that Micro Four Thirds Guy, and I'm here at Carlisle Cathedral, magnificent building in the background, and I've been trying out this is the Lumix 7-14 f4 constant aperture zoom lens. Really good little bit of kit, got a few drawbacks on it, but overall I think you're going to be quite impressed with it. So let's see what we can do, having a look at the photographs as we go through. Well, let's look at some of the photos that we took in the cathedral grounds and in the city itself. We can clearly see, as we're taking photographs of the buildings from ground level, the converging parallels which are caused by the distortion of the very wide angle lens. The front onto the cathedral, and if we take the lens even further wide angle, you can see that the building itself becomes something of a dot in the distance. These aren't even at the extremes, these are at 10mm and 7mm, so we've actually got the ability to zoom in further than what we've seen on this. Now if you actually compare it to something like the 25mm lens, which is the 50mm equivalent on full frame, if we were standing this close to get this shot of this building, this is what we're seeing from the 25mm lens. Going to 7mm, we can instantly see that the distortion takes effect. We've got the building in, but what should be a 90-degree angle on the building becomes an awful lot more acute as the building becomes distorted and trying to be squeezed into the frame. Again, looking up slightly on the same corner, we can see that we've got a normal sort of perspective there in the 25mm lens, but by taking it onto the 7mm, not only do we get distortion on the angle of the two walls going away, but we also have that sort of falling away effect of the vertical. And it's one of the problems that we do have on ultra wide angle lenses, insofar as making sure that we try and keep it straight on both in the horizontal and the vertical to disguise as much of the distortion as we can. One of the things that the wide angles really can do, though, is if we put a little bit of distance behind, we can get some wonderful views of buildings from a short distance away, and these can really make a building itself stand out. If we're looking at some of the features, for instance this archway, taken on a 40mm lens, which is the zoomed in part of this lens if you like, we've got a wonderful perspective as we get a huge amount of depth. We don't get the compression that we do on a telephoto lens where everything is brought in together, so the arch in the back looks a far distance away, when in actual fact it's actually not too far at all. It's only a path width basically. Again, by taking a little bit of distance and stepping back on the 40mm lens on this, the feature itself becomes very picturesque and prominent. It gives a great deal of depth to the shot because we don't get that compression of a longer lens. Taking it from the 7mm, I'm probably stood here no more than a foot away from the wall itself, yet it looks as if I could be 10 feet away from it. Moving into the city centre, and what's not particularly long street. Carlisle's not a particularly big city, yet it has a huge width to it, and again that vanishing point effect as the two sides come into a single point in the centre, and it really does give that give an impression of depth in the street itself. Again, the two arches which I mentioned before, you see they're only a small width apart there. And one of the beauties that we do get with using very wide angle lenses is we can see an awful lot of a different perspective on things like this display. One of the beauties with this lens, one of the things I really do like about this lens, is the contrast is superb. The colour rendition is really, really good. And it is actually a very, very sharp lens all the way across the board. The ability to actually differentiate the different textures and things really comes out well on this lens, and it's something that I do quite appreciate when I'm doing a lot of the building photography. Now the big problem with something as wide as a 7mm lens on a Micro Four Thirds, which is equivalent to a 14mm on a full frame camera, is distortion. It's not a fisheye lens, it does keep it away from the fisheye territory, so you're getting a full frame out of it, or a full sensor out of it. But the problem that we're getting with it is if you don't keep the camera perfectly straight, and if you don't get far enough away from something, you're going to find that you get distortion coming very, very quickly on these things. Now, I use it a lot because I actually find the distortion pleasing from an artistic point of view. If you want to record something as an exact rendition, no, forget it. It's not going to do you at all. One of the good things about using this lens though is I use it quite often if I'm doing any sort of building photography, inside especially, because the insides of the buildings you can get really close to walls. The important thing with that though is, again, keep the camera horizontal as you're shooting. Make sure that you don't tilt it. Otherwise it very, very quickly will distort the room, make it look so odd it's untrue. Now, being a constant aperture and f4 lens right across its zoom range does give video photographers something of an advantage, because you can actually keep it fully wide open, zooming in and out as well, without altering your exposure at all. And that's something I find really, really useful if I am using anything on video wise, and trying to get a nice open aperture. So bear that in mind if you are wanting something really wide and have that constant aperture. Very, very good lens for that. Lens flare can be a little bit of a problem on this, unfortunately. It does have a built-in hood, which is part of it, and it actually acts as a part of the protection, because the front of the lens extends quite far out, quite domed out, so the lens hood is very much part of the protection for the lens itself. But even so, shooting into the sun, as we've just seen there, is well, it's not the best thing for this lens. It does have coatings on which the manufacturer suggests reduces lens flare, but you're not really going to get rid of it too easily overall. So what do I think of the lens? Well, overall I think the lens is a great bit of kit. It's very expensive though for what it is. It's not the cheapest lens on the market. I do find that it's pretty sharp right across the board, from corner to corner and in the centre too. Focusing usually isn't a problem on this. It's usually sharp because it's a wide angle lens, and you've got a depth of field on being wide angle lens from 7 to 14. You've got a depth of field which is so deep it's untrue, so almost everything is going to be in focus. That means that focusing on the camera is very, very quick, very accurate. You don't get any sort of hunting on it, but overall it's a specialist lens. It's not what you use day to day. I probably use this, if I'm lucky, 10% of my shooting time, if that. But when I do need something of this sort of ilk, it really is the most useful thing in the camera bag. The lens doesn't have any stabilisation in it, but again, being such a wide angle lens, it really doesn't need it. And if you've got something, you're shooting this on the GX8, or if you're using one of the Olympus cameras with in-body image stabilisation, or the later Lumix cameras with in-body image stabilisation, you're not going to have any problems at all. If you are using it on something early Lumix wise, like the in-body image stabilisation, it's going to be a bit difficult if you're going to be using it on video to get any sort of stability. But in reality, it's not that sort of lens. So here we are at Carlisle Castle, the Sand Castle as they call it. This really is quite an interesting subject to take photographs of on this, but with the sun being very, very low and off to my west, I'll just tilt around a little bit and you'll be able to see it in the background on this. It really does create some problems for this lens. The lens flare really is unusable. You can't even get away with the excuse of using it for artistic measures a lot of the time. And it's a drawback of this focal length of lens. You're in a very, very wide angle area on this, and there's no way you can get around it, whatever the coatings that they put onto it to control. I do find that it is a difficult lens to use. It takes a great deal of skill to master, and you really need to be using it for specific things. It's no good just trying to use it as a general lens. You're not going to get anywhere with it. But if you are wanting to use it for probably for landscapes and for architectural shots, I would say more than anything else, or if you're doing anything in the way of
real estate photography, it's probably a great lens to use for that. I love the fixed aperture, the f4 right across the board, but overall the lens is something, as I said previously, I very rarely use, but when I do need it, when I need that focal length to come into its own, it's superb for it.
Well, let's just finish off by looking at a few more of the shots that I took, which highlight both the distortion of the wide-angle lenses and also some of the textures which it pulls out. For instance, the van here, getting close in, we can see the distortions, but also one of the problems that we get with an ultra-wide-angle lens is seeing things like our own shadow and often our own feet. And because there's so much information in the frame normally, it's quite easy to overlook the fact that you've got something like your feet sticking into the bottom of the frame. So it is worth being careful on that, and it does become very, very easy and very prominent to get those things in the frame. Changing the position, of course, will do quite a bit of change on that, but you can also see that the vertical distortion on this, as we go into these shots of the van, the vertical distortion really does have quite a dramatic effect on the perspective that you're seeing in the shot. Going to landscapes though, the motor around the castle, again on a 7mm lens on this one, the motor around the castle is quite stunning, and the way that the castle disappears off into the distance, again you're getting that real depth that you wouldn't get from a telephoto lens because of the compression. And again, looking at the archway here into the building, you can see that it looks quite a decent distance in there, but in actual fact it's only about 20 feet. But again, it gives something of a drama to that which you wouldn't get from a medium to telephoto lens.
Once again, this is Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy signing off. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button below. We're now over 1100 subscribers, and I really do appreciate all of you for doing that. Hit the bell for notifications, and if you can give us a thumbs up to like this video, that really helps YouTube with its algorithms to spread the video so more people can see it. And finally, I keep on saying this, but I don't get monetized for this video, so if you can spare a couple of shekels for a coffee, there's a PayPal link below. I really would appreciate anything you can donate on that. That helps not only pay for a cup of coffee every so often, but it helps pay for some of the fuel for me to get to these locations. So anything you can spare is greatly appreciated. And for all those who have given me something on there, thank you very much. You've got no idea just how much that helps. Really do appreciate it. All the best. Until the next time, this is Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy signing off and saying, enjoy your photography until I see you again. Bye bye.